You can go ahead, Alan, I guess.
Okay, let's kick off. So as Truman on the Truman Show might say, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night to everybody, and welcome to our panel on delivering a blazing fast search over 50,000 records. So my name is Alan Burke. I was the tech lead on the project. And with us today are Christopher Torgelson. He's in France. I'm in the west coast of Ireland. We have Juan Luis Lozano from, well, Juan, you're an international traveler, from Venezuela, living in Croatia at the moment. And we have Jason in Los Angeles. So Juan and Christopher were both involved in the project. Christopher was involved in the search integration. Juan was the lead front-end developer on the project. And Jason is joining us here today from Typesense. Typesense provide the search infrastructure that we use to deliver this search. So I'm going to give a little backstory on the project, but before I do that, I'm going to do a little demo of the website. And the reason for that is that the website is unfortunately geo-blocked in much of the world outside of Ireland, basically. So if you try to go to, I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if this works. So hopefully you guys can see the Cars Ireland site. Juan, can you give me a yes or no on that? Okay, so this is the Cars Ireland website. And just in terms of the experience we're trying to demo, we've got a really fast search here. So even with just one character search, we get some very instant search results with live counts from the search index. And as soon as we click on that, then we get a up-to-date search result. If we change any of our parameters, the search result updates straight away. And we click through to the search interface and we can see we get a blazingly fast search. We can do things like add another vehicle. So we want to search for some Volkswagen Golfs and they get added to the search results set pretty much instantly. We can change the ages. So let's say we want to look for more recent cars. I'm told these cars will all look very small to a North American audience, but there you go. We can change and we can filter by fuel type. And again, we get instant searches. We can also do some changes on our ordering. And then we can adjust, fine tune the search. So that's just a very quick demo of the site. I just wanted to go through that before we talk about the project itself. So we will try and stop screen sharing. And it should be back to my pretty face again. Okay, so Cars Ireland is, okay, just having a quick look at the chat to see if anybody's shouting at me. Cars Ireland is one of Ireland's largest and leading car classified search sites. So it's a site primarily for buying cars. What marks out Cars Ireland is that it's the one with the closest relationship to car dealers themselves. So it's not a buyer, or a consumer to consumer website. It's very much a car dealer to consumer website. So the dealers can keep their inventory on the lot tightly integrated with the Cars Ireland API through an application they have on site. And then that API drives the Cars Ireland website itself, but it also drives a number of other things like the native applications. It drives some of the car dealers' websites themselves and some of the car dealer group websites. So they're all driven off the same API, and we're one of the consumers of that API. So Cars Ireland themselves are they're part of the independent media group in Ireland, one of Ireland's largest media house, and that in itself is part of a larger Belgian conglomerate. So we're dealing with a larger corporate enterprise behind this, but luckily the team we dealt with were fairly small and nimble, can make some quick decisions. So the website itself has had a sort of a little interesting history in that it was started about maybe 3 years ago. Myself and Mark, another developer within Anertech, had worked on the site, and we got it to maybe 80–90% towards complete. We thought we'd done a pretty good job, but as things happen, life got in the way on the Cars Ireland side in particular, and the project was shelved, due to be picked up at some point in the future. And this was one of the good side effects of the COVID-19 crisis. So for a lot of our clients, and Cars Ireland can include themselves in this, they were freed from the shackles of playing golf and racing cars and riding bikes and having meetings, that they decided to pick up their website project again. So that was basically a decision taken sort of the middle of last year, that this project needed to be resurrected and go live with it. So in the meantime, they had changed the design. The new design had to be implemented. But from our perspective, we felt that the backend was in good shape. We were consuming their API. We had been using Drupal's Migrate API to consume their REST API. So we pull in about 100,000 nodes, all told, into the Drupal backend. And we had built a search interface that uses Drupal Search API and pushes them into the Solar, And from that, then we use the Search API and the Facet API and some extras such as the Facet Pretty Paths module to deliver a very good search experience, we felt. So we had some very good SEO, we felt, and we had a reasonably fast search experience. And that was all fine. But as the project evolved, so too did the SEO requirements. And one of the first things that the Cars Ireland decided they would like is the ability to have the on-page search, so the demo that you just seen. They wanted that to be split out from the search engine results pages. So that would be something whereby if I search for Volkswagen Golf on Google or another search engine and I landed on Cars Ireland, they wanted those search engine pages to work slightly differently and perform in a slightly different fashion. So we had to split up the search. So this was one of the first things that had come along as a new requirement. So I think at this stage, Christopher was involved in the project, and the requirement for two different search interfaces had manifested itself when we were looking at what that would mean. So I'll bring you in at this stage, Christopher. Do you remember when this arrived in your desk and what your thoughts were on this initially, the requirement for two different search interfaces?
Well, the requirement for the two search interfaces superficially wasn't too concerning, because really they would be, essentially we'd be able to deliver them with separate views and integrations with the searches. And it was only later that we realized how complex these SEO pages would be, and that they would have to be, in effect, almost a completely different application. The reason for this, just by the way, is that they relied on arguments, contextual filters, the views would, that were not fixed in their positions. So, and there were hundreds of permutations. So that was a sort of a problem. But having the requirement sort of bifurcate into two different searches also let us start to think about the on-page search, and it also freed us to sort of start to look at it critically, and it started to make us nervous. The speed of the search API search, the basic on-page search, when we compared it with the client's competitors, they referred us to their competitors quite often in cases where the designs weren't fully realized, and we started to think that our search was sort of worryingly uninstant.
Yeah, so our search, to bring everyone in, our search was very classic search. You would have a search form with a number of filters, and you would pick your chosen set of filters and go down to the very bottom and click search, and you get a search result, and everyone will be happy. And that was that was what we were looking for 3 years ago. It was still part of the designs that were delivered very recently that we were interpreting. But as Christopher said, we were comparing this to a number of other competitors, and it didn't seem quite as slick. And we felt we could do better. So I suppose, Christopher, at what point did Typesense come into the equation then?
I forget who it was. I think it's Mark and Mike of Enertech had discovered this sort of fast search product, fast search tool, independently of this project. And when we were discussing sort of what we needed for this project, they introduced it to us, and we started then being very excited, basically, and started like wanting to try it out. And I think we took application and got something working not with the client's data, but got something working rather quickly, just to see if the scale that we needed to work on would, was practical. The scale is sort of on the rough order of 100,000 records, as Alan said. And we just wanted to see, can we search, numerous fields across a data set like that as fast as what the demos seemed to show? And yeah, and we could.
And did you look at any other alternatives at the time? Like, I know that there are competitors in this space, like Algolia and Elasticsearch and things like that. So how far did we get down that road, or were we sold on Typesense?
I didn't get very far down that road, but we, and I forget who, but we started to look into the pricing and did find, I think, Jason, you'll have more to say about this later, but found that at least Algolia's instant search didn't fit the budget. I don't know any more details than that, except that it's got, I think, per request pricing, which when you are making a request almost per character, or actually per character when you're typing a search, starts to get expensive quickly.
What was the client's initial feedback when we gave them the demo then?
I think they said,
as I understood it, we just went ahead and did a demo without getting approval to see how that would work.
Was that the time they told us it was savage?
Savage, yes. I'll let non-Irish people look that one up.
Apparently, it means good. It means good.
So yeah, the client were impressed. Savage is about as high as the compliment as you can get for your work in Ireland, as far as I'm concerned. And then, from that, so we were tasked with, taking the full search experience and implementing it in Typesense. So I guess, what were the initial pain points that we hit when we started to work on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly about pain points, but it was pretty clear that we'd have a lot of integration tasks to do. And while I'm talking about this, if anybody is interested in the specific resources, the specific tools I mentioned, there's a pinned tweet thread at the top of the chat here that you can refer to. But we knew that we would have to, first we'd need to have a server, like we need to be able to run the Typesense server in the development environment. We knew that we would need to, once that was done, we knew that we would need to be able to communicate with it for indexing and indexing and searching from Drupal. And we knew we didn't know this right away, but we discovered later that we really missed the kind of UI that Solar provides, for example. So we needed also a way to be able to query the index without actually running a search, like from in the end, Drush is what we used. And we knew finally that we would have to build or use some kind of existing UI tools to provide the actual search experience in the front end, because we, thanks to Alan's architecture, we sort of had this idea of Drupal as lava, where we wanted to take the load off of Drupal as much as possible, so that huge amounts of the sort of search in the application could be cached. So the plan coalesced around sort of a semi-decoupled search application, which used data from Drupal, but not directly from Drupal. So Drupal on creation, update, and deletion of nodes would plug stuff into or remove stuff out of the index. And then when we queried the index, we'd be doing that directly to Typesense, from front end and Typesense. And I've completely lost the plot with your question, Ellen.
No, that covers it. You talked about the pain points and how we overcome the pain points. Yeah. That's fine.
So I suppose there was one last thing to say about those then, which is that at every point when we looked for something to solve one of these problems, the Typesense guys had already written it. So it was, I haven't, I mean, yeah, we were just surprised we'd find something at every stage. So we had like Docker images for the server itself. We have a composer package that we were able to use for the Drupal interaction, and then later for the Drush tool that we wrote. And then the UI parts that we used are actually Algolia's React components. And as I had mentioned in the Twitter thread there, Typesense and Algolia don't speak exactly the same language, but there's also a translation layer that the Typesense sort of product line includes. We did have pain points, but none of them were the integration points, as you would expect they would be.
So just one other question before I bring in one on this. So we took the decision to go with Typesense Cloud, and we'll talk about Typesense Cloud and Typesense itself shortly. But was there any particular reasons we went with that? Could we have just run this ourselves on our own servers, or?
I think we could have, but I don't think we wanted to.
That's good enough.
Like given the alternative of like having like a SaaS solution to that, like a software service solution to that, where it's like a dedicated sort of infrastructure and sort of management, I'm all for that.
Okay, good stuff. Juan, I'm going to bring you in at this stage here. So basically, as Christopher said, we ended up having to build a mini decoupled application essentially inside of Drupal. So you're responsible for the front end. And I guess the first question is, given that there was so much JavaScript there, was there any performance issues that you hit, or yeah, because the search itself is pretty fast, but like at the front end layer, did you hit any other performance issues?
Performance-wise, no. I mean, well, at this point it's 2021. We cannot say that we compromised using Internet Explorer 11, even though there's a lot of companies that are still using it. But I wouldn't say that we actually compromised anything in regards to performance, rather than being extra careful in the JavaScript that is written. So try not to break anything, and even the smallest, I wouldn't say change, but feature or enhancement, we had to recheck that the search was working according to the parameters required, because if the JavaScript is breaking, then search is pretty much not working.
Okay, so, and that's a good point, actually. We have a relatively brittle in that if the JavaScript is broken, the whole site is broken. But in terms of, so that's one aspect of this, in terms of the theming, we have to be particularly careful on. How else was this project different? In particular, the search interface, how different was it from standard Drupal theming?
Well, you have two separate components. You have the theme part, and you have the React application part. So pretty much you have markup in two places. What I did was pretty much preserve the same markup in both case scenarios. So pretty much, Typesense search, as Christopher said, it came like later in the phase of the development, when we started to look more alternatives to make this search faster. So how to say, I mean, I already had the theme, the search themed and working in style. So when this all arrived, we had to do the styling once again, but just matching selectors and wrappers, it was not as a big deal as just remembering, okay, if you need to change something, if you need to fix something, if you need to update something, you need to go directly to the React app and not to the theme level.
Okay, good stuff. And then in terms of implementing the new tool in Typesense and an instant search interface, did you have to make much UI or user experience changes? Did everything just have to be swapped out? Talk us through that, because that's something that might not be obvious, that you know, it's not just a case of swapping one tool for another, that you also have to change the user interface as well.
Yeah, I mean, we got delivered designs that were using a typical search interface with a filter button and pretty much default advanced search with drop-down widgets and auto-select stuff. Sorry, not autocomplete fields and etc. But all of that was kind of old for this search, because the search was instant. You don't need to click a submit button. You just need to do a change on the form, and the search will just re-execute or do a query once again. So we had to get rid of all of the submit buttons, all of the search buttons. We had to get rid of all of the combined filters, because combined filters we had to go with a range filter where we have a minimum value and a maximum value. We cannot have a filter, okay, give me anything between, I don't know, 5,000 euros and 7,500 euros, something like that, because it kind of limits a little bit the results or the the details that the user wants to search for. But we had to mimic, for example, on mobile, we have to mimic that usability of the search button, where we have a search call to action, but the search call to action is not doing anything, just hiding the canvas where the filters are displayed. So fast on mobile that we had to give to the user an action to make in order for the user to realize, okay, something happened, something changed, because it is fast at the point that you don't know that something actually changed.
So we had to fake it and make it slow down, even though it wasn't slow.
Not slow it down, but fake the search click action. You're actually not searching. The search was already made.
Okay,
just click search to hide the filters.
So now that we're at a point where we've delivered a decoupled search, was there any thought given at this stage that, well, maybe this should just be a full decoupled website?
But time time was the biggest issue in there. And then, it will need time just to get a clarification with the client what we wanted to do it and why we chose that road, and then that will go a conversation why to do it on React, why not Vue, why this, and it will be like a research that will take time, and that's something we actually didn't have to throw away in some sort.
Would you have any concerns with the size of the data set? So we're looking at 50,000. So basically the advertised talks about 50,000 records. Technically there's 100,000. It's just that 50,000 of them are unpublished.
Yeah.
Does that kind of scale, would you have any concerns about implementing a decoupled site or a statically generated site at that scale?
No, because I could definitely see a combination using the search with React and Typesense. And we could go with Gatsby and generate just the vehicle pages as static content, because there's nothing that changes too much. There's no interaction per se on those pages. So we could have go with Gatsby.js without a problem, or we could have just continued down the road with React, and we have a massive React application.
Okay.
Maybe phase 2, 3.
Phase 2 or 3. Yeah. Well, if we ever get to meet the client for a beer, then we'll bring that up with them. Yeah. Jason, I'm going to bring you in at this point, and we'll talk a bit about Typesense. So the first thing is, like, we only heard about Typesense 6 months ago. So how long has it been about?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I, we've been working on Typesense since 2015. We started working on it as a nights and weekends project. Decided to open source it in 2018. And then that's when we posted on Hacker News, and we started seeing some initial interest in another search engine, because at the time, it was mainly Elasticsearch. I had used Solr, maybe almost a decade ago now. And then Elasticsearch came along. So Typesense came out of our own frustrations with setting up Elasticsearch. in production, configuring the JVM and going through their all their APIs. And we wanted to build something that was super simple to use. And that's something that we thought, okay, maybe if we like it, maybe other developers also would appreciate simplicity and still get many of the features that Elasticsearch offers. So 2018, we open sourced it. And then in 2020, we did another Hacker News post saying it's an open source alternative to Algolia. And that seems to resonate with folks a lot. And then people started asking us for more features that Algolia had. So since then, it's been growing organically. People are finding it. I'm excited that new folks are discovering Typesense and using it. So right now we're about 5,000 stars on GitHub. We have about 29,000 Docker pulls. So I'm excited seeing others being excited about the project. So in 2020, I started working on it full time, and my co-founder just started working on it full time last month. So we're excited.
Good stuff. So then, wherein lies the difference between Typesense Cloud and Typesense?
Yeah, so Typesense Cloud actually came out of people asking us for a hosted version, especially coming from the world of Algolia, where they take care of all of the infrastructure. People just wanted an API and a set of API keys to interact with for search versus having to self-host and manage servers, et cetera. So that came as a repeated ask from people, and we figured, well, that's our monetization strategy right there, because again, we're working on it full-time now, so we got to make money through, though the project is open source, 100% open source, the core is open source. So we decided providing hosting would be our strategy to sustain the open source project and ourselves. So one of the things in Typesense Cloud is that we offer this a feature called Search Delivery Network. So it's similar to a CDN, except that here, anytime when you turn on the Search Delivery Network feature, anytime a search request comes through, the node that's closest to the user ends up serving that request, so which keeps the search experience super fast, even for people around the world. And then, of course, things like high availability are point and click, and you can deploy a cluster in about 16 data centers. So we're trying to make it as easy as it is to use Typesense, just like any other SaaS service. But if you still want to self-host it, again, it's 100% open source. It's you can deploy it on your own infrastructure. And we've also optimized for keeping it easy to deploy on yourself as well, because even if not for anything, just selfishly, we need to keep our operational overhead low on Typesense Cloud. So any improvements we do to make Typesense easy to host ourselves makes its way back into the open source product as well, which makes it easy for people to self-host. So I'd say if someone has an infrastructure team on staff, then adding Typesense into the mix should be trivial. We have a Docker instance, we have Kubernetes, we can deploy that into Kubernetes. Or if you're in the whole serverless ecosystem, or you're using Firebase or don't want to manage servers, then there's Typesense Cloud.
And you mentioned Algolia in there. Where would you see the key differences between Typesense and Algolia?
Oh, right. So to touch on something that Christopher said earlier, so one of the biggest things with Typesense Cloud is how we charge for the search experience. So Algolia charges by number of records and number of search operations. So it becomes very expensive if you have a large number of records and do less number of searches in it. Or if you have a small data set and you have a ton of searches on it, then your pricing goes whack, because it becomes very expensive because you're on one end of either spectrum. Whereas in Typesense Cloud, the way we bill is more infrastructure type pricing. So something like what AWS or GCP charge, which is based on the amount of RAM, CPU, your basic computing configurations, and we charge it hourly price. So for that given amount of RAM, CPU, you could throw as much traffic at it, as much data at it as it can handle, and there's no additional charges for this. Bandwidth charges, just like, again, how cloud providers charge, but it's not a per search charge or a per indexing charge or a per record charge. So that makes the pricing really attractive for interesting use cases. So for example, there's this one showcase that I built with searching 32 million records of songs. So hosting 32 million records in Algolia at, I think they have $1 per 1,000 records, that would be $32,000 per month to host a data set of that size. In Typesense Cloud, it's for that particular data set, you could host it for as little as $1,200 a month. And that's because it's a 32 million data set. But if you scale down the pricing, like you can host it very economically in Typesense Cloud. And one of the reasons we decided to price it this way is because we want to democratize search, meaning that good search technology, in my opinion, should be available to more folks and not just folks who can afford to pay a premium for it. So, which is why we open source the project if you want to self-host it. But even with Typesense Cloud, we want to charge a reasonable amount and still, make a sustainable living out of an open source project. So that's our philosophy around pricing.
So in terms of when the Cars Ireland project came along and you saw us, so basically we talked to you guys. I'll go into the reasons or why later on. But do you feel that this kind of a project, so a classified search, is that the kind of project you see as a good fit for Typesense? Or is there other types of projects where you see you've got a sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say search is one of those things that is universal across different domains. So I frequently stumble on more and more interesting use cases that people are using Typesense for, which is, it's always a fun thing to see how people are using your product. I would say one thing that was unique to the Cars Island experience that pleasantly surprised me was that it's not just for text-based search. It's also for the primary search experience is through filtering. So you set a bunch of filters, and I think there are around maybe 25 different filters. And that's the primary search experience. So what you traditionally think of as search, which is typing in keywords and getting a result, there is a search bar as well, but that's probably way at the bottom of the site. But you first search by selecting the make and model, the year, the mileage. And so primarily searching through filtering was something that was an interesting, that I thought was an interesting use case at the point.
Okay, that's good. And then the corollary of that, do you feel there's bits that we're missing out on, or rather elements of Typesense that we could leverage a bit more?
Let's see. I think adding, I'm not sure if Cars Island has this, but there's also an element of multi-tenancy that's supported in Typesense, where if you have, for example, user-specific data, let's say, for example, there's a favorites feature where people can favorite different entries or different cars. And you can allow them to search just within their favorites. So there's a feature where you could store all that data in one index and generate API keys that allows you to only search through a particular user's record in addition to the public data set. Let's see. Besides that,
No, that's a good one, because we do have that as a feature. We don't run it via Typesense.
Oh, you do? Okay. All right. That's good to know. Okay.
But yeah, that's something we can look at that as a future enhancement. Phase 3, the mythical phase 3. One thing that our client were very concerned about was load testing. So we went through a fairly rigorous load testing process. Can you talk us through how that was handled at the Typesense?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to make sure is that before going live, we wanted to make sure that the instance configuration or the cluster configuration that was chosen around RAM, the amount of vCPU, and whether we're using NVMe SSDs or not, I wanted to make sure that that particular configuration is able to sustain the amount of traffic that was expected. And so I ended up building a little test harness using K6. That K6 is another open source load testing framework. So I went and clicked through different filters on the site, like a typical user would, collected all those network requests that were being made to Typesense, and then put them inside K6 and ran a load test just to make sure that there's no other that particular configuration works right for the load test or for the load expected. And we were able to sustain up to, for this particular cluster configuration, we were able to sustain up to 60 search requests per second. And we could have scaled up higher with more CPU capacity, but this particular cluster, which was suited for the traffic that was expected. So We also went through a round of optimizations. We found some optimizations we could do on the Typesense core side, also added that. And since we found out through this particular data set, we were able to then open source those improvements back to the Typesense core as well. So it was a nice little loop to use the improvements that we found as part of this project back to the Typesense core, and now the community can then benefit from that as well.
No, that sounds good. So in terms of people getting involved with the project, how do you?
Yeah, so
things?
like I mentioned, it's just the two of us working on Typesense. So given that our goal is to democratize search, I'd love to get help with more integrations with different frameworks and also client libraries. So right now we have a PHP, Go, JavaScript, Ruby, and Python libraries. We recently had an ask for a Java library, a Rust client. So if anyone's experts, I'm not an expert in every language out there. So I'd love to get contributions around client libraries and also around frameworks. Like, I mean, the Drupal example is a great example. Like, I'm not a Drupal expert, but the fact that Christopher is able to jump in and contribute the Typesense, the Drupal integration, like that's awesome. Like now more people can start integrating Drupal with Typesense. So folks are working with Magento or WooCommerce, like WordPress, like all these are different things that people are starting to ask for. So if you're an expert in any of these or would love to get involved in open source, I'd love to partner with you and build something.
Okay, good stuff. How are we for time? Our moderator appears to have disappeared.
Oh, he says Q&A in about 5 minutes.
So what I'll do is
Q&A
in 5 minutes. Oh, okay, good stuff.
Thank you, guys.
So, I mean, I'm going to... Oh, we've lost Christopher.
Yeah, he's here. I can see.
He muted himself.
Okay. So one of the things actually it was sort of touched on by Christopher and Jason, but one of the reasons that we went with Typesense Cloud was, I mentioned at the outside that the organization we're dealing with is actually, it is a multinational, albeit we're dealing with a small team, and they're very insistent on being backed by proper support for the different projects. So technically, we could have the chops to run the Typesense search service ourselves, but we're not experts on it, and we weren't going to pretend that we were. So this project would not have run Typesense if it wasn't for Typesense Cloud, because that was a key requirement. And then I know that at a business level, that took a lot of work as well to get that over the line, because we had to deal with procurement and legal and all the things that go with dealing with a large organization. So they're very keen on performance and very keen on dealing with entities that are going to be around for a while. So the front end is on Cloudflare, the hosting is on Acquia, and now Typesense Cloud is in there as part of that equation as well. So that was a kind of a big deal. And actually the technical issues that Christopher hit or we hit were, I always felt we were going to get over those. The legal and the procurement stuff that goes on with dealing with large entities, I wasn't as confident that we would get over that. But in the end we did, and I think we've got a much more successful project for it. Okay, so we have 15 minutes. Well, I think we'll start asking some questions if I can see them. Q&A in 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes ago. Okay, good stuff. So I'm going to go over, there's a Q&A tab here, and I'll start asking some questions. I'll start with one for you, Jason. Does Typesense have anything similar to Solar's Learn to Rank to improve relevancy via machine learning?
No, not at the moment, but that's interestingly starting to come up more and more as people are discovering Typesense. So it's definitely on our radar, but we haven't started work on it at the moment.
Okay, good stuff. I'll go to some of the older questions. Seems a bit unfair. Amazing work. Thank you very much. Why Typesense? And how much has inclusion helped the cause, given that Solar and Elasticsearch have similar capabilities? I mean, I guess I'll take that one. So the Solar was fine. It did a good job. Typesense had the client libraries we could work with straight away. That was definitely an advantage it had. And the last one then was the ability to use Typesense Cloud. Like that was a key part of the decision-making process. So the technical aspects of it were part of that, but let's call it the corporate aspects were important too. Sorry, did you manage the cars as Drupal entities, or are they managed as part of a data set exposed to Drupal? Okay, well, this was my problem. The cars arrive in from a REST API that Cars Ireland make available. And what we do is we just parse that REST API and store them as Drupal nodes. So there's 100,000 nodes sitting in a database. And then everything flows from there. So we, at the point of creation, deletion, update, we will both update Search API at the back end for those search engine results pages I talked about earlier on. They're generated using Search API. But also we will use the Typesense libraries to send data up and down to Typesense there as well. Is there anything you want to add to that, Christopher? I know you've been looking at a Search API Typesense integration.
Sorry, I've lost the beginning of the question now.
Sure, no problem. So the question was how we handle the cars as Drupal entities. So explain how we pull all that stuff in. So you've been looking, and right now, or certainly for some of this project, we didn't have a direct Search API to Typesense integration, but I know that's something.
Yeah, well, so in the project itself, the Drupal entity is kind of like it's the center around which everything else revolves. So we make entities out of the Cars Ireland API, and as we do that, we index them into Typesense. We don't in that project use the Search API integration because we just didn't have enough time, and it was actually sufficient for the particular needs of this project to just index on sort of node create, update, and delete hooks, which is what we've done. Search API is definitely nicer, and again, there's been a little chat there, and there's a link in the Twitter thread at the top of the chat. I've started work on that. People were asking about releases. I have nothing like a release in view. It's just been a sort of thing in the spare time at the moment. I imagine if we got other projects that required sort of Typesense, we could probably throw some resources at it, but I'm putting it out in the community, so hoping people will report bugs.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can speak to that one a little bit. It's definitely going to be something we'll look at a later phase in the project, because right now we have an extra moving part that we don't need. So we have Solar as a moving part that we don't need. We're now confident at this phase that we could use Typesense index for doing two different things. And that's what Christopher's project will let us do. So at some point when the dust has settled, and it's still settling, this website's part of a larger piece of work. You know, it's not just the website, let's say. Once the dust settles on it all, that'll be this is the kind of thing that the client in particular would be interested in, is removing moving parts that we can use to make the project simpler. So that's something we'll definitely look at. So Jason, you touched on this slightly, but maybe we'll run through it again and how it might work. Is how well would Typesense handle content restricted to specific groups or users? So Drupal has this module called Content Access, which lets us restrict access by Drupal user role or Drupal group membership. How would we go about doing something like that in Typesense? Because at the front end, all of the queries go straight from the browser to the Typesense engine or Typesense cloud engine, or if you were self-hosting, to the Typesense server as well. They don't pass through Drupal at all. So how would we go about handling some sort of access control?
Yeah,
there
so
for private
the way you typically handle that is add a new field to every document, say, for example, accessible by user ID, and have a list of users that can access it, or have a list of roles that can access that particular record and index that along with the rest of your data. And then you can generate what's called the scoped API key with embedded filters in them that users can't change. So for example, you can generate a scoped API key which says user ID equals 123. And then when you generate a scoped API key and use that API key to make the calls from the browser, then any search requests that are made that filter is automatically applied by Typesense behind the scenes, which means effectively that API key can only access the data where user ID equals 1 in the data set. So you can effectively create API keys that can only access certain records, and you can still use those scoped API keys from the browser directly to the Typesense engine.
And you got 5 minutes left now.
Okay. Cool. Okay, cool. Thanks, David. Okay, let's have a look at some more of the other questions then. I asked those ones. Yes, support for languages other than English. I guess that's a question.
Yep.
On
so
Typesense
right now we have support for any languages that use spaces for delimiting words, which is a lot of languages. But specifically, we currently don't have support for CJK languages, so Chinese, Japanese, Korean, which don't have spaces for words. That's something that we're working on right now. We have to build a custom tokenizer for it. We're working on it right now. Should be out. We actually have a beta for Thai and Korean out right now, but Japanese is something that we're about to start working on.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I'll ask the question and see if it makes sense then. Are there concerns around the Typesense SaaS business model for funding open source projects and large hosting providers bringing hosting into their own offerings? Or bringing search into their offerings?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. I would say at the stage that we are in, I would actually be thrilled if more folks start offering hosting around us. And I'd also say I'd love to partner with folks to actually build hosted services on top of us as well. Again, if we're all trying to build a community around Typesense, I'm happy to help share the value created with more folks who might want to build a SaaS offering on top of Typesense. So I look at it more as an opportunity for partnership rather than a competition, because I believe the market is large enough and there are interesting niche offerings that different SaaS providers can bring to the table that we as a search infrastructure provider possibly go after. For example, there might be specific content-related things that might be needed for on top of search. So when we're building Typesense Cloud, we're gearing it towards developers, but there is a lot of opportunity on top of Typesense, but gear it towards other different business domains as well. So I'd say I'd love to partner, and I see that as to help grow the Typesense community through helping others build SaaS products as well on top of Typesense, in addition to consumer-facing experiences.
Okay, good stuff. How are we doing on time? I want to make sure we don't run over. Where do we do?
Couple of minutes.
I think I've got through all the questions, actually. Oh yeah. 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay, well then let's see if there's any more last-minute questions before we get cut.
Oh, I see one question about
tidbits of information I got out about the
project.
project.
I see one question about scale with 3 million pieces of data.
I missed that one. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So how can Typesense scale with a site using 3 million pieces of data that keeps getting indexed and re-indexed? How long would it take for that data, for Typesense, to index that data for Typesense to be able to search? Actually, I'm going to ask Christopher about this one, because this was one that we were concerned about too, because we had 100,000 records with a relatively volatile data set, and we had to get it into Drupal and get it out to Typesense. So how does that work out for us?
I actually have a number in my head from my underpowered, my 8 gig RAM dev server. I was indexing 10 Drupal nodes a second on the same machine that's actually running the Drupal website, which isn't very impressive, but that's a lot slower than what we have everywhere else. Initially, when we were actually timing it from inside the Drupal hooks, we couldn't really determine that there was like extra time added between just sort of creating the node in the first place, or creating or updating or deleting the node in the first place. It was small, let's just say. So The thing about
Yeah. So
our content is there's churn, but it's sort of a node at a time. It's not 10,000 nodes at a time. Or I mean,
yeah. So we go 2,000 every 5 minutes is sort of what we limited at the moment, or 2,000 every 3 minutes, and that is absolutely no problem. Especially like as Christopher said, those kind of speeds are on his. No offense, Christopher. Tiny little dev server, and luckily the production side is running on a decently spectacular setup. So that's not been an issue at all. The one thing we did find out though is that it all depends on how big the data you put into your index is. So our site, and Jason or Christopher, correct me wrong, we might have a lot of records, but actually the size of the data that we store in Typesense is actually quite small, even if for 50,000 records. Is that right?
There are a lot of fields in each record, but
Jason?
none of them has, only about 2 of them have anything more than, 3 to 4 words worth of content in them.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, we could definitely handle much larger traffic. Like I mentioned, there's the 32 million dataset, record dataset that I tried it with. Specifically, I benchmarked it with the 2 million recipes dataset with titles and ingredient names. And that took about 3 minutes to index the entire 2 million and odd dataset. So indexing plus re-indexing if you wanted to. So we've built it to be able to support large volume of ingests and re-ingests as well.
Oh, I have a question about indexing.
Yes.
In Typesense Cloud, can we index with just with a direct import, like with a large JSON file?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yep.
I knew we could do it in dev, but I didn't know if the service allowed it.
Yep, for sure. You could upload JSON documents up to 3 gigabytes is what I've tested with. So if you find larger files, I'd love to know if you're not into those.
Right. Okay.
Okay, good stuff. Look, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think, David, are we?
Yeah, we're good on
about
time.
right?
So thank you all for a great presentation.